Okay, let's take time to wrap this up. It is the summer of 1917, and I wanted to give you a brief overview of how this game ended up. You can see the progress of the IPP chart as well as diplomacy. But let me walk you through here. You see the U.S. Making its move in the Pacific, how the Japanese ended up. Now, something I wanted to point out to everyone in terms of how this playtest ended to help make sense of how the victory objectives worked out. The Japanese flip sides, and that is a constant potential if things don't go historical from the very beginning. And probably most significant of all, Paris fell. Paris fell. But while Paris fell, probably part of the reason Paris fell is because the British were busy wrapping things up in Africa and the Middle East. And so I wanted to just give a brief overview of the victory objectives and how this thing ended up. I think I told you in the last video, the U.S. were pushing for peace without victory. It actually took 3 full turns before they brought that about. So essentially a year of diplomatic negotiations, probably not a bad representation. So up here, you see the outcome from the game that I play tested with Brian. And it ended up, this being the Axis side, the Central Power side, and this being the Allied side. We ended up, for the Central Powers, I scored 15 victory points, and Brian scored 12. So this makes it a near draw. It is a draw, according to the transition table that we're working on that will be released shortly after this. And then we went on to play the Civil War, and the Soviets ended up with 4 victory points. And Brian walked you through those in his videos. Had we not played that, the Russians would have ended with 4 anyways. So, for the Russian player, that may or may not matter. I have not gone into the Civil War yet for this game, but even with all that German activity and 2 victory cities, in this case, the Ottomans were not nearly as successful. And so it's still a draw, 13-10. The U.S. was a little bit more successful by pushing peace without victory. And the Russians fell out about the same, the British not so well. But again, there's a draw. And so some of the things that will come from that, from the transition table, if we were to go on to Global 36, include the potential that nations could hang on to some of their colonies that they didn't necessarily have. Imagine if Germany started with the Marshall Islands in Global 36, or German colonies such as German South Africa. So some potential there, or the British could reinforce some of their colonies in Africa for the start of the game. Imagine the Soviets starting with Eastern Poland, and I just took some quick notes, or additional infantry provided to the Spanish at the beginning of Global 36 in the Spanish Civil War. So just some things that might come about if you were to play Global 14 and then use the transition. I'm now going to set up for the Russian Civil War that had no Russian collapse during the course of World War I. So even though World War I ended without a Russian collapse, we're going to assume, because of the external pressures, the internal pressures on the Soviets combined, will result in the overthrow of the Tsar. If you look back in history through the late 1800s and into 1905, it was actually one of a revolutionary event that was not successful. So it was just a matter of time, and with all of this pressure, the Soviets would come about through their communist activities. So we're going to collapse the Tsar, set up for the Russian Civil War, and then take a few turns just to see what that looks like in order to continue to refine that. Have a great weekend.